Welcome to the InnoGuide podcast. I'm your host, Bob Bouthillier. This podcast, my website, and my weekly newsletter are focused on helping you discover the secrets of innovation in the age of AI. Since I don't rely on paid ads, I want to thank our customers who subscribe to our AI Fusion Kickstarter programs, those who leverage AI Fusion coaching, and those who leverage our parent company, DesignNet's product development team, to help them develop products smarter and faster, and to bring human-centered AI into their organizations. You can find us at www.innoguide.net. In this episode, number 77, we'll be sharing AI in 2026, skills, agents, trust, and the cost of pretending we understand AI. This is part 2 of a 2-part series that I put together from a number of papers and from interviews on another podcast site as well. Links to those can be found on my website at innoguide.net/InnoGuidePodcast. So I hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, please enjoy this episode. Welcome to the InnoGuide podcast, where we share the works of authors and mentors to guide innovation. Let's get started. We'll do a short review of Part 1, What Broke and Why Leadership is the Constraint. Part 1 focused on the failures we're already living with, many of which we didn't recognize as failures at the time. We started by looking at how AI is compressing skill ladders faster than organizations can adapt, quietly deleting the apprenticeship pathways that produce judgment and experience. We explored why the skills that matter most now are not the technical skills, but sense-making skills, and why reskilling alone won't solve the problem. From there, we examined a critical mental model error, treating AI like a feature instead of like infrastructure. We talked about how that framing creates what many teams are now experiencing as AI debt, systems that look impressive but are fragile, hard to govern, and difficult to trust. We then moved into agentic systems and why they fail so often, not because the models are weak, but because organizations never formalize meaning, decision rights, or accountability. Agents don't create clarity, they amplify whatever confusion already exists. From there, we looked at trust, not as tone or user experience polish, but as recoverability. The most dangerous AI systems aren't the ones people distrust, they're the ones people stop checking. We also examined discovery theater and the growing temptation to replace real customers with synthetic ones. AI can accelerate synthesis, but it can't replace accountability. And when teams confuse the two, they end up shipping confident failures. Part 1 closed by reframing the real gap organizations face today. It's not an AI literacy gap, it's a leadership literacy gap. AI isn't breaking organizations, it's revealing what they never fully understood about themselves. So that was Part 1. Part 2 focuses on what actually works in 2026 and what quietly fails. Here we shift from diagnosis to practice. This is where we focus on what's actually working and why. We start with engineering, looking at the rise of AI-generated code and what's often called vibe coding. While AI has collapsed the cost of producing software, it has not collapsed the cost of maintaining it. In fact, it's shifted engineering advantage away from writing code and toward auditing systems, enforcing standards, and preventing hidden fragility. From there, we'll explore a broader shift happening across product and design, the move from creation to curation. When output becomes abundant, coherence becomes scarce. Taste, standards, and editorial judgment stop being nice to have and start functioning like infrastructure. We then examine model risk, why your product inherits the liabilities of the models underneath it. Whether you chose them intentionally or not, data provenance, transparency, and governance are no longer just compliance concerns, they're competitive differentiators. We look at the interfaces beyond chat and why prompting is a transitional interaction model, not the future. The most effective AI systems reduce cognitive load by capturing intent, constraining risk, and proposing actions rather than forcing users to orchestrate everything themselves. Finally, we confront one of the most important truths in the AI era. AI amplifies incentives, not values. Speed, cost-cutting, and engagement obsessions don't disappear with AI, they accelerate. Without deliberate leadership, they backfire. Part 2 closes with a practical leadership checklist. What credible AI leadership actually looks like in 2026, not in slogans, but in boundaries, accountability, recoverability, and honesty. This is not about slowing innovation. It's about making sure the systems we build are fast without being fragile and powerful without being careless. Chapter 7. Vibe Coding and the Quality Cliff. Why code is cheap, but reliability is about to get very expensive. Let's talk about one of the most intoxicating developments in the AI era, and one of the most dangerous. Code has never been cheaper to produce. With modern generative tools, individuals and small teams can now generate entire applications in days that would have taken months just a few years ago. Interfaces, backends, integrations, workflows all materialize within a few well-crafted prompts. This feeling is empowering, almost euphoric. This is what many people now call vibe coding. And to be clear, there is a real upside here. As discussed in the Design of AI in 2026 and in the Design of AI episode 41, Mayor Shlomo describes how AI-enabled development allows small teams to ship at a pace that was previously impossible. In the early stages, this can unlock creativity and reduce barriers to entry and dramatically shorten time to market. But there's a cliff hiding behind that acceleration, and most organizations don't see it until they're already failing. The fundamental mistake leaders are making is assuming that the cost of producing code and the cost of maintaining systems scale together. They don't. AI has collapsed the cost of creation. It has not collapsed the cost of coherence. In fact, it's made coherence harder to achieve. See, when code is cheap, teams generate more of it, more variations, more integrations, more edge cases, and because the code often looks right, it passes superficial review, until it doesn't. Scott Jensen, who spent years at Apple and Google, warned about this exact pattern in Design of AI episode 13. He described the most corrosive failures as systems that appear correct under normal conditions, but collapse under edge cases. These are the failures that damage trust because they don't announce themselves early, they wait until the stakes are high. AI-generated code dramatically increases the risk of this failure mode. Not because the code is always bad, but because its intent is implicit, not explicit. Humans writing code leave behind traces of reasoning, comments, structure, naming, context, that reflects how they were thinking. AI-generated code often produces syntactically clean outputs without leaving behind any explanation of why decisions were made. That matters more than most leaders realize, because software systems are not just artifacts, they are arguments. They encode assumptions about the world, about users, about failure, about responsibility. When those assumptions are not visible, systems become different to reason about, especially under pressure. This is where the quality cliff appears. In the Design of AI in 2026, engineering leaders describe a growing unease. Velocity is up, but confidence is down. Teams can ship more, faster, yet feel less certain about what they built. Why? Because AI-generated systems often lack narrative integrity. They work, but no one can easily explain how all the pieces fit together, or what will happen when conditions change. Stack Overflow's research into AI-assisted coding reinforces this concern. Developers report that while AI tools speed up initial development, they often introduce maintainability risks, duplicated logic, inconsistent patterns, and code that is difficult to extend safely. These problems don't surface immediately, they emerge over time when systems need to evolve. And evolution is where the cost lives. Here's the provocative insight leaders need to absorb. AI makes it easy to build systems you don't actually understand. I'm going to say that again. AI makes it easy to build systems that you don't actually understand. And systems you don't understand cannot be governed, secured, or trusted at scale. This is why the engineering advantage in 2026 is shifting. It's no longer about who can write code the fastest. It's about who can audit systems effectively. Who can, 1, enforce architectural standards, 2, detect hidden coupling, 3, identify silent failure paths, and 4, prevent local optimization from creating global fragility. These aren't glamorous skills. They don't demo well. They don't show up in lines of code ship metrics. But they determine whether an organization can survive its own velocity. This is where many executives feel tension. On the one hand, AI-enabled development promises speed and cost reduction, but on the other, experienced engineers are raising flags about quality, maintainability, and risk. Leaders sometimes interpret this resistance as being conservative or being in fear of change, but that's a mistake. What experienced engineers are reacting to is not AI itself, it's loss of control over system behavior. In traditional development, complexity grew slowly enough that teams could adapt. With AI, this complexity arrives instantly. Entire subsystems appear to be fully formed without the gradual learning that normally accompanies growth. That learning gap matters because when something breaks, and it will, organizations need people who can reason about the system, not just regenerate it. Regeneration is not recovery. If your response to failure is, we'll just reprompt it, you've already lost. This is why some of the most mature organizations are intentionally slowing down AI-assisted development in later stages, even as they embrace it early on. They're distinguishing between exploration velocity and production resilience. They use AI aggressively to prototype. They use it cautiously to scale. They introduce gates, architectural reviews, explicit documentation of assumptions, regression testing tied to real-world outcomes, and clear ownership for long-term maintenance. These practices don't make headlines. They make systems survivable, and survivability is the real advantage. Here's another uncomfortable truth surfaced in The Design of AI in 2026. Many organizations underestimate how expensive it is to clean up AI-generated messes later. As Scott Jensen predicted, a new class of consultants is already emerging, not to build AI systems, but to clean them up. That should give leaders pause. If AI enables you to ship faster today, but forces you to spend years stabilizing tomorrow, the ROI math changes dramatically. This is why vibe coding must be treated as a phase, not a strategy. It's useful for exploration. It's dangerous as a foundation. And this brings us to a final reframing for this chapter. The real cost of AI-generated code is not paid at creation. It's paid at change. Every future modification, every new integration, every compliance requirement, and every unexpected edge case. Organizations that treat AI as a shortcut to production will experience a delayed reckoning. Organizations that treat AI as a collaborator, one that still requires human judgment, standards, and review, will compound advantage. In the next chapter, we'll zoom out from engineering and look at a parallel shift happening across product, design, and brand. The move from creation to curation, and why taste is quietly becoming infrastructure in the AI era. That's where abundance turns from opportunity into liability, unless leaders intervene deliberately. Chapter 8. From Creation to Curation. Why taste, standards, and coherence become infrastructure. For most of the last 20 years, organizations have optimized for one thing above all else: output. More features, more content, more experiments, more releases. Productivity was measured in volume. Teams that shipped more were seen as winnings. Teams that moved slowly were seen as blocked. AI has broken that equation, not because it reduced the importance of output, but because it made output abundant. And abundance changes what matters. In The Design of AI in 2026, this shift comes through clearly across conversations with product design and creative leaders. When generation becomes cheap, value no longer comes from producing things. It comes from deciding what should exist at all. This is where many organizations are quietly struggling. Generative AI tools can now produce dozens of UI variants in minutes, endless streams of copy, rapid design explorations, and entire product concepts on demand. At first, this feels liberating. Teams feel unblocked, creative bottlenecks disappear, velocity spikes. Then coherence starts to erode. Products begin to feel inconsistent. Brands drift subtly over time. Design standards weaken, and teams lose confidence in what good looks like. And leaders often misdiagnose the problem. They assume teams need better prompts or better tools or more AI training. But what they actually need is stronger curation. Philip Maggs, speaking on Design of AI episode 20, describes this shift clearly. The human role is moving from producer to editor, not metaphorically, but structurally. AI can generate faster than any human can review. That flips the constraint. The bottleneck is no longer creation. It's judgment. and judgment doesn't scale automatically. This is the part that makes leaders uncomfortable. Judgment requires taste. Taste requires standards. Standards require saying no. AI makes saying yes effortless, but it makes saying no more important than ever. Sarah Vienna, Chief Design Officer at MetaLab, reinforces this point in Design of AI Episode 26. As generative systems flood teams with options, the ability to curate, to select, refine, and reject becomes the defining skill. Without it, organizations drown in their own output. Here's the provocative truth you need to hear. In the age of AI, inconsistency is no longer a minor brand issue. It's a system's failure. Customers don't experience features in isolation. They experience patterns, tone, rhythm, expectations. When AI-generated artifacts proliferate without strong curation, those patterns fracture. And a fractured experience erodes trust. That's why taste is becoming infrastructure. Not in the aesthetic sense, but in the operational sense. Infrastructure sets boundaries. It enforces consistency. It makes outcomes predictable. When taste is implicit, it varies by team. When it's explicit, it becomes scalable. Historically, many organizations relied on senior designers, product leaders, or brand stewards to just know when something was off. That worked when output was limited, but it fails when AI multiplies output by orders of magnitude. In the Design of AI in 2026, leaders describe a growing realization. Without codified standards, generative tools amplify drift faster than humans can correct it. And the drift is subtle. It doesn't announce itself, it accumulates. One slightly off interaction, one inconsistent tone, one shortcut that almost fits. Over time, the product no longer feels intentional. This is where organizations face a strategic choice. They can treat AI as a force multiplier for creativity and accept fragmentation as the cost. Or they can treat AI as a reason to invest more deeply in standards, systems, and curation. The organizations that choose the second path do something counterintuitive. They slow down generation in order to speed up coherence. They define what good looks like, what patterns are allowed, what deviations require reviews, and who has the authority to decide. These decisions are not about aesthetics, they're about reliability. Because coherence is not just a brand concern, it's a usability concern, a trust concern, and ultimately a business concern. And here's another uncomfortable insight surfaced in the Design of AI in 2026. Abundance without curation erodes confidence internally as well as externally. Teams stop trusting each other's output. Reviews become harder. Alignment slows down. When everything's possible, nothing feels solid. This is why some of the most effective organizations are reframing productivity metrics. Instead of measuring how much is produced, they measure how much is reused, how consistent outcomes feel, how quickly teams can say, this fits or it doesn't. That shift requires leaders to elevate taste from a personal trait to an organizational capability. Taste becomes something you document, teach, reinforce, audit, not because creativity should be constrained, but because creativity without boundaries produces noise. AI doesn't eliminate the need for human taste, it makes it indispensable. And this is where many executives struggle. Taste feels subjective. Infrastructure feels objective. But in the AI era, the most damaging failures often come from pretending subjective judgment doesn't matter. It does. It always has. AI simply removed the friction that used to hide the consequences of weak curation. This leads to a final reframing for this chapter. In a world of infinite generation, restraint becomes a competitive advantage. Organizations that invest in curation, in standards, coherence, and editorial authority will feel slower at first, but they will generate less noise, and they will ship fewer variations. They will build products that feel intentional, trustworthy, and durable, and that's what we want. The next chapter will examine another hidden inheritance many organizations overlook, model risk, specifically how data provenance, transparency, and vendor dependency quietly become product risk, and why governance is no longer optional. That's where AI strategy collides with legal, reputational, and operational reality. Chapter 9. Model risk is product risk. Your product inherits liabilities you didn't choose. There's a quiet assumption embedded in many AI strategies that deserves much more scrutiny than it gets. The assumption is this: models are infrastructure, and infrastructure is someone else's problem. As AI systems become more deeply embedded in products and workflows, the behavior limitations and liabilities of the models underneath them stop being abstract technical concerns. They become product characteristics. And that changes the risk profile entirely. In the design of AI in 2026, this shows up as a consistent blind spot. Product teams make thoughtful decisions about user experience, workflows, and automation, while treating model choice as a largely interchangeable back-end detail. That separation no longer holds, because when a model produces an output, your product owns the consequence, not the vendor, not the research lab, not the API provider. Customers don't experience the model, they experience you. This is where model risk quietly becomes product risk. Oveta Sampson, former director of AI and compute enablement at Google, makes this point forcefully in The Design of AI, episode 49. She argues that large language models are the wrong default for most enterprises, not because they aren't powerful, but because they introduce layers of opacity that organizations are not prepared to govern. When teams treat frontier models as plug-and-play infrastructure, they inherit risks that they can't see, inspect, or fully explain. An inheritance without visibility is not a strategy, it's a liability. These risks fall into several overlapping categories, all of which compound over time. First, there is provenance risk. Most AI-enabled products rely on models trained on data that product teams did not curate and cannot fully audit. That matters more than many leaders realize. Virginie Berger, a rights and licensing expert, laid this out clearly in Design of AI Episode 5. You cannot claim ethical or defensible output if you cannot explain inputs. And when training data is contested, removed, or legally challenged, model behavior can change in ways downstream teams don't control. This isn't hypothetical. As training data sets are challenged or revised, outputs can shift subtly, sometimes degrading, sometimes changing tone or coverage. Products built on top of those models inherit that instability, which leads to the second category, consistency risk. Products are designed with expectations about reliability, tone, and behavior. Models are not static artifacts. They are updated, tuned, and patched, often without downstream teams having meaningful insight into what changed. This can create a mismatch. Your product roadmap assumes continuity. Your model supply chain doesn't guarantee it. Emily Bender and Alex Hanna, authors of The AI Con, address this structural issue directly in Design of AI Episode 34. Their argument is not that models are useless, but that promises being made about them systematically ignore how brittle and context-dependent they are when organizations outsource core reasoning to models they don't control. Third, there is security and misuse risk. Prompt injection, data leakage, tool misuse, privilege escalation. These are no longer edge cases. They're operational concerns. Models that can act, not just respond, expand the attack surface dramatically. And when these models are embedded into products without clear boundaries, failures can propagate quickly. In The Design of AI in 2026, practitioners describe scenarios where AI agents had access to systems that humans would never be granted without layered review, simply because the risk wasn't considered holistically. The model didn't go rogue. System design was naive. Fourth, there is procurement and trust risk. Large customers are becoming far more sophisticated in how they evaluate AI-enabled products. They ask questions many vendors are unprepared to answer. What model are you using? What data was it trained on? How do you evaluate failures? What happens when the model changes? Who is accountable? As Gartner and Reuters have reported, a growing number of agentic AI projects are being paused or canceled, not because the technology failed, but because the business case and governance story just didn't hold up under scrutiny. Trust is no longer assumed, it's audited. This is where many organizations discover they have built products whose risk profile they can't defend. And the most dangerous moment is not when regulators ask questions, it's when customers do. Here's the provocative truth you need to absorb. If you can't explain your model choices to a skeptical customer, you don't understand your own product risk. This is why the Stanford Center for Research on Foundation Models created the Foundation Model Transparency Index. Their work tracks how transparent major model providers are about training data, evaluation, and risk management. What's notable is not just that transparency varies, but that it declined from 2024 to 2025, even as model capabilities improved. That trend should concern product leaders because it means that as models become more powerful, they may also become harder to explain. An explanation is not optional in regulated enterprise or trust-sensitive environments. So what does responsible leadership look like here? It starts with rejecting the idea that model choice is purely a technical decision. Model risk needs clear ownership, typically shared across product, legal, security, and customer experience. It requires deliberate trade-offs. Organizations that are getting this right do several things differently. They prefer models and vendors with stronger transparency practices, even if performance is slightly lower. They implement data minimization and strict consent boundaries instead of defaulting to more context is better. They treat model upgrades like major dependency changes with regression testing, evaluation suites, and rollback plans. And most importantly, they design systems that degrade gracefully when models behave unexpectedly. This does not eliminate risk, but it makes it manageable. In the design of AI in 2026, one insight comes through repeatedly. Provenance is becoming a competitive advantage, not a compliance burden. Organizations that can explain how their systems work, what data they rely on, and how they handle failure are not just safer, they are more trustworthy. And trust, as we've already discussed, compounds. This leads to a final reframing for this chapter. You don't use a model, you inherit it. Its strengths, its blind spots, its legal exposure, and its failure modes. And once inherited, those risks belong to you. In the next chapter, we'll look at where many organizations try to manage this complexity and often fail at the interface layer. Specifically, why chat is a transitional pattern, not the future, and how better intent capture can dramatically reduce both user friction and system risk. This is where product design becomes a form of risk management, whether leaders recognize it or not. Chapter 10, Beyond Chat. Why prompts are a transitional interface, not the future. If you look across the AI products launched over the last few years, a clear pattern emerges. Almost everything starts with chat, a text box, blinking cursor, a prompt that asks users to explain what they want in natural language. At first, this feels intuitive, conversational, human. And for early experimentation, it works remarkably well. But as AI systems move from novelty to infrastructure, something becomes clear very quickly. Chat is not a scalable interface for serious work. It's a bridge, not a destination. It's one of the strongest through lines in the design of AI in 2026. Teams default to chat because it's fast to implement and easy to demonstrate, but over time, the cognitive cost becomes apparent. Users struggle to express intent clearly. They repeat themselves. They second-guess phrasing. They don't know what the system already knows. They don't know what it needs from them. In effect, the burden of orchestration shifts onto the user. And that's the opposite of what good tools do. I'm going to say that again. The burden of orchestration is shifting onto the user, and that's the opposite of what good tools do. Alexandra Holness, speaking in Design of AI Episode 10, describes this realization from inside real product teams. Early on, prompt-based interfaces felt empowering. But as systems matured, teams noticed that forcing users to explain everything in natural language was cognitively expensive and often worse than traditional interfaces. People don't want to describe their intent. They want to achieve it. This is where the chat-first mindset begins to break down. Chat assumes users can articulate what they want in the right level of detail, at the right moment, without knowing how the system works. That's a tall order, especially in complex, high-stakes workflows. And it introduces risk. Ambiguous prompts lead to unpredictable outputs. Unclear intent leads to overreach or underperformance. And users often don't realize what they forgot to specify until something goes wrong. Here's the provocative insight you need to absorb. Every prompt is a mini specification, and most users are not trained system designers. When organizations rely on chat as the primary interface, they're effectively outsourcing product design to end users. That might be acceptable for exploration, but it's dangerous for production. Tuan Kumar, who has led design at Apple, Airbnb, and Meta, expands on this in Design of AI Episode 35. He argues that the real future of AI interfaces lie not in better prompts, but in better intent capture. Intent capture means the system does more of the work. It leverages context the user shouldn't have to repeat. It constrains choices to what's actually possible. It surfaces options progressively instead of all at once, and it asks for confirmation only where stakes are high. In other words, the system proposes and the human approves. This is a fundamentally different interaction model than chat, and it aligns closely with what Microsoft Research outlines in its New Future of Work report. As AI becomes more ambient, embedded into tools people already use, the most effective systems reduce the need for explicit interaction altogether. Users don't talk to the AI. They work, and the AI adapts. This is where leaders often misinterpret the transition. They assume moving beyond chat means losing flexibility or creativity, but in reality, it often increases both, because constraints clarify action. Structured inputs, toggles, defaults, and guided flows are not regressions. They're cognitive aids. They reduce error, they make behavior predictable, and they surface intent in ways that systems can reason about safely. And from a risk perspective, they matter enormously. In the Design of AI in 2026, practitioners repeatedly note that many of the most damaging AI failures begin with ambiguous prompts. The system does something reasonable based on incomplete information, and the human only realizes the mismatch after the fact. How many times have I done that? Interfaces that rely heavily on chat amplify this risk. They obscure what the system knows, what it assumes, and what it will do next, as well as what actions are irreversible. Better interfaces make those things visible. This is why the shift away from chat is not primarily about UX polish, it's about governance. When intent is captured explicitly, systems can enforce constraints, apply policy consistently, log decisions clearly, and create audit trails that make sense after failure. Chat, by contrast, is notoriously difficult to audit. Prompts vary, context shifts, subtle phrasing changes outcomes. Reconstructing intent after the fact becomes nearly impossible. And for leaders operating in regulated enterprise or trust-sensitive environments, this should be a red flag. Here's another uncomfortable truth that surfaced in the Design of AI in 2026. Many organizations cling to chat because it hides uncertainty. When systems propose structured choices, leaders must decide which options to allow and which to forbid. That forces clarity. Chat allows ambiguity to persist. But ambiguity doesn't disappear. It just moves downstream, where consequences are harder to manage. The most effective AI products in 2026 will not feel like conversations. They will feel like competent collaborators. They will anticipate next steps, surface relevant context automatically, limit options when stakes are high, and ask for confirmation only when it matters. Chat may still exist, but as one interaction mode among many, not the default. This is a crucial shift for leaders to understand. If your AI strategy is still framed around, where do we add chat? You're asking the wrong question. The better questions are, where is user intent currently hard to express? Where do users make the most costly mistakes? Where does the system already have enough context to act? And where is confirmation more important than speed? These questions lead to designs that are safer, clearer, and more trustworthy. And trust, as we've seen, compounds. This brings us to the final reframing for this chapter. Chat made AI accessible. It will not make AI sustainable. The future belongs to systems that reduce cognitive load, not increase it. Systems that respect human attention and preserve judgment. In the next chapter, we'll look at a deeper force shaping all of these decisions, incentives. Specifically, why AI amplifies whatever organizations are already optimizing for, and how speed, cost-cutting, and engagement obsessions quietly backfire. That's where strategy, ethics, and economics collide, whether leaders acknowledge it or not. Chapter 11. AI amplifies incentives, not values. Why speed, cost cutting, and engagement obsessions quietly backfire. There's a comforting story many leaders tell themselves about AI. The story goes like this: AI is neutral. AI is a tool. AI will help us do what we already do, just faster, cheaper, and at greater scale. But the story is incomplete. And this year in 2026, it's becoming actively dangerous. The more accurate framing, one that emerges clearly from the design of AI in 2026, is that AI does not introduce new values into an organization. It amplifies the incentives that are already there. This distinction matters more than almost any other strategic consideration. If an organization optimizes for speed, AI will deliver speed. It will also deliver fragility. If an organization optimizes for cost cutting, AI will reduce costs. It will also collapse capability. If an organization optimizes for engagement, AI will drive engagement. It will also amplify manipulation risk. AI is extraordinarily good at scaling whatever you reward. It doesn't ask whether those rewards make sense. This is where many executive teams get caught off guard. They assume AI will magically lift outcomes without forcing hard trade-offs. But in reality, AI strips away friction. And friction is often the only thing preventing incentives from running wild. In the design of AI in 2026, this pattern shows up repeatedly. Organizations deploy AI to accelerate goals they never fully examined. And because AI works, they get more of what they asked for, not necessarily more of what they wanted. Dr. Maya Ackerman, speaking in Design of AI episode 47, frames this risk sharply. She warns against turning generative AI into an oracle, a system we defer to rather than collaborate with. Her concern is not about creativity per se, but about outsourcing judgment to systems optimized for fluency rather than wisdom. When organizations treat AI as an authority instead of a partner, they quietly abdicate responsibility. And responsibility doesn't disappear, it just resurfaces later, usually in a crisis. This is particularly visible in engagement-driven systems. Peer-reviewed research has already demonstrated that AI-generated dialogue can outperform traditional media in influencing beliefs and behavior. That's an extraordinary capability and a profound risk. If an organization's success metrics reward time on platform, clicks, or conversion at all costs, AI will find a way to optimize those outcomes. It will personalize messaging. It will test variations. It will nudge behavior. And unless leaders set boundaries explicitly, it will do so without regard for long-term trust. This is the provocative truth you need to confront. AI will not protect you from bad incentives. It will make them unavoidable. That's why the venture landscape around AI looks so distorted right now. As noted in the Design of AI in 2026, AI now captures the majority of venture funding, yet an overwhelming percentage of enterprises report little to no return on their generative AI investments. The gap is not accidental. It reflects a market optimizing for stories rather than outcomes. Ben Yoskowitz, co-founder of Highline Beta, highlights this dynamic in Design of AI Episode 6. He describes founders chasing AI-enabled solutions to problems that don't actually matter to customers because funding, hype, and signaling reward novelty over utility. AI accelerates that mismatch. It makes it easier to build impressive demos, but it makes it harder to stay grounded in real value. Inside enterprises, the same pattern appears in a different form. Executives feel pressure to do something with AI. Teams respond by automating visible processes, often those tied to headcount reduction or throughput metrics. Short-term gains appear, costs go down, output goes up, and then something breaks. Knowledge disappears, judgment erodes, resilience drops. That's what the Design of AI in 2026 refers to as capability collapse, a slow, often invisible erosion of the organization's ability to respond when conditions change. Because when AI replaces people without redesigning learning pathways, organizations don't just use labor, they lose sense-making. AI can execute, but it doesn't care. And caring about customers, about edge cases, about long-term consequences is what keeps systems from drifting into harm. That's why leadership in an AI era cannot be reduced to ambition or vision. It requires constraint. It It requires leaders to say, we will not optimize for this even if we could. We will accept slower progress in exchange for resilience. We will protect judgment even when automation is tempting. Those are not popular stances. They rarely make headlines. They often feel like leaving money on the table. But in an AI era, restraint is not weakness, it's governance. That's where the phrase AI amplifies incentives, not values, becomes operational. If leaders don't articulate values in enforceable ways through metrics, guardrails, and system design, AI will default to whatever is easiest to optimize. And easiest to optimize is rarely best for the customer. So this leads to a sobering but empowering realization. The future of AI in any organization is not determined by the sophistication of its models. It's determined by the clarity of its incentives. AI will make whatever you reward impossible to ignore. So the question leaders must ask is not, what can AI do for us? But, what are we actually rewarding? And are we prepared to live with the consequences at scale? Organizations that take this question seriously do something different. They audit incentives before deploying automation. They measure second-order effects, not just immediate gain. They protect trust as a long-term asset. And they recognize that some forms of efficiency are actually debt. And most importantly, they design AI systems that support human judgment instead of replacing it. This is not anti-technology, it's pro-responsibility. And it sets up the final chapter. Because once leaders understand that AI amplifies incentives, the final question becomes unavoidable. What does credible AI leadership actually look like in practice? Not in slogans, not in strategy decks, but in daily decisions, boundaries, and accountability. That's where we'll go next. In Chapter 12, the 2026 Leadership Checklist, to close this series with a concrete, defensible framework leaders can actually use. Chapter 12, the 2026 Leadership Checklist, what credible AI leadership actually looks like. As we close this series, it's worth returning to a simple observation that surfaces again and again across every source that we've explored. The AI era is not separating leaders by ambition, it's separating them by clarity. Nearly every executive team today can articulate why AI matters. Most can describe compelling future scenarios. Many can point to pilots, prototypes, and early wins. Far fewer can explain calmly, clearly, and defensively how AI actually operates inside their organizations. This gap is becoming visible. Boards are noticing. Customers are asking sharper questions. Regulators are paying closer attention. And employees are quietly assessing whether leadership actually understands the systems they're rolling out. In the design of AI in 2026, one of the most striking patterns is that AI failures rarely stem from lack of intelligence or effort. They stem from leaders outsourcing understanding to vendors, to technical teams, or to the technology itself. And outsourcing understanding is no longer survivable. So what does credible AI leadership actually look like in 2026? Not aspirationally, but practically. It starts with accepting a hard truth. AI has turned leadership from a role focused on direction setting to a role focused on system stewardship. Leaders are no longer just responsible for what their organizations do. They are responsible for how decisions are made when humans are no longer in every loop. That requires a different posture. The first marker of credible leadership is clear boundaries. Leaders must be able to articulate without hedging what AI systems in their organization are allowed to do and what they're explicitly forbidden from doing. Not in vague ethical terms, in operational ones. Where can AI act autonomously? Where must it ask for approval? Where is it never allowed to operate, no matter how efficient it might be? In McKinsey's Quantum Black research on agentic AI, teams that succeed don't start with capability. They start with constraint. They define the sandbox first and then decide what to automate inside it. Organizations that skip this step often discover their boundaries only after something goes wrong. The second marker is explicit accountability. In pre-AI organizations, accountability could be diffuse. Decisions flowed through people, responsibility could be shared, negotiated, or quietly absorbed. AI removes that ambiguity. When a system acts, someone owns the outcome, whether that ownership was assigned or not. Credible leaders make that ownership explicit. They can answer, who's accountable when the system is wrong? Who reviews failures? Who has the authority to stop or override automation? And who owns recovery? As the design of AI in 2026 emphasizes, organizations that fail to assign accountability early don't avoid blame. They defer it until failure is public and painful and has caused brand debt. The third marker is designed recoverability. Trust, as we discussed earlier, is not about confidence, it's about recovery. Credible AI leaders insist on answers to questions many teams would prefer not to dwell on, like, what happens when the model is wrong but confident? How do we detect silent failure? How do we unwind automated actions without cascading damage? This is where insights from aviation, healthcare, and safety-critical systems become relevant. Systems that survive stress are not those that never fail. They are those designed to fail visibly and reversibly. Microsoft's research work on the future of work reinforces this point. As AI becomes more embedded and ambient, recoverability must be treated as a first-class design requirement, not an afterthought. The fourth marker is model and data literacy at the leadership level. This doesn't mean leaders must understand architectures or training techniques in depth. It means they must understand inheritance. As we explored in Chapter 9, models bring with them assumptions, limitations, and liabilities. Credible leaders can explain why a particular model was chosen, what data it relies on, what risks it introduces, and what happens when it changes. They don't hide behind vendor abstractions, and they don't dismiss these questions as technical. Because customers, regulators, and partners no longer accept we used a model as an explanation. The fifth marker is incentive alignment. AI amplifies whatever an organization rewards. Credible leaders understand this and act accordingly. They examine metrics before automating them. They question whether speed, cost reduction, or engagement are the right primary signals. They look for second-order effects. As discussed in Design of AI in 2026 and reinforced by voices like Dr. Maya Ackerman and Ben Yoskovitz, many AI failures stem from incentives left unquestioned until they're scaled beyond control. Credible leadership means being willing to say, we could optimize this, but we won't. We could automate this, but we should. We could move faster, but we would lose something we can't easily rebuild. The sixth marker is protection of human judgment. This may be the most counterintuitive one. The strongest AI leaders are not trying to eliminate humans from decision-making. They're trying to preserve judgment where it matters most. They design systems where humans review edge cases, arbitrate trade-offs, set direction, and intervene when context shifts. They recognize that judgment is not inefficiency, it's resilience. The World Economic Forum's skill framing underscores this. The skills rising fastest are those required to make sense of complex, partially automated systems. Leaders who erode those skills in the name of efficiency are borrowing against their organization's future. I'm going to repeat that because that's really important. This map of the World Economic Forum's skills, which is a 4-quadrant map, the skills rising fastest are those required to make sense of complex, partially automated systems. Leaders who erode those skills in the name of efficiency are borrowing against their organization's future. Finally, credible AI leadership is marked by intellectual honesty. Leaders who succeed in 2026 are not the ones who claim certainty. They're the ones who acknowledge what they don't yet understand and design accordingly. They resist AI theater. They avoid slogans. They ask uncomfortable questions early. When something goes wrong, they don't look for someone to blame. They look for the system failure that made it possible. That brings us to the closing insight of the whole series. The AI era is not primarily a test of technology. It's a test of leadership maturity. AI has removed friction. It has compressed timelines and has exposed assumptions we could previously ignore. And it has made pretense expensive. As the Design of AI in 2026 concludes, the organizations that win are not those with the most advanced models. They're the ones willing to redesign themselves, their workflows, incentives, and accountability around reality rather than aspiration. AI will not save organizations from poor leadership. It will reveal it. But for leaders willing to step into that clarity to treat AI not as magic but as infrastructure, the opportunity is enormous. They will build systems that are faster without being fragile, smarter without being opaque, more capable without being careless. And that's what credible leadership looks like in 2026. So that wraps it up. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Remember that our website is innoguide.net, where we have many resources for innovators and for people who want to build medical products with or without embedded AI, for those who want to use AI in the development process, and those who want to do automations, and know that you'll be learning it from someone who's worked in medtech for 30 years and has been using large language models since they emerged in 2022, and has also shipped medical products with embedded machine learning models in the products for over 9 years now. I also want to thank Steve McIntyre for producing this, and I really want to thank you for joining us. I look forward to seeing you next time. That's a wrap.